The garden hadn't changed, not really. The iron trellis still creaked the same way when the wind rustled through it, and the scent of the white roses, Father's favorites, hung thick in the air like a ghost that refused to leave. I wore his old gardening gloves, still too big despite the years, and carefully clipped each bloom with the precision he taught me. He used to say pruning was about trust, trusting the plant to grow stronger where you cut it, trusting yourself to know where to cut. I never thought I'd be the one doing it alone. The sun filtered softly through the clouds, casting a dappled light over the marble angel near the hedgerow. Willowshade Hall sat quietly behind me, its windows reflecting the pale sky. A few petals dropped to the earth as I worked, their fall slow and graceful. My mind tried to stay in the moment, to focus on the task, but anticipation tugged at the edge of my thoughts. The will reading was tomorrow. Everything could change. I heard the sound before I saw her, sharp, deliberate, the kind of footsteps that demanded attention. Designer heels against flagstone. I didn't have to turn around to know who it was. Celeste, Jordan Vale said, her voice sweet and smug like syrup over poison. Still playing gardener, I see. I stood slowly, brushing dirt from my knees. Her red coat was too bold for the setting. The way she always was too loud, too curated. She looked exactly like someone who'd practiced her entrance 100 times in the mirror. This garden doesn't prune itself, I said, my tone dry but polite. That was the game with Jordan. Stay composed, keep your spine straight, don't give her an inch. She sauntered closer, her eyes scanning the rows of white roses like she owned them. I wanted to tell her to get out, to leave this place untouched by her plastic smile and poisoned tongue, but I knew better. You didn't show weakness to a woman like Jordan. She'd use it as fertilizer. I thought I'd stop by before tomorrow, she said, as if this were a social call. Garrett and I are very curious about the estate arrangements. Of course, with all the time I spent at Walter's side in his final months, I imagine we'll be well cared for. There it was, the threat wrapped in perfume and false sentiment. She smiled like a woman who already counted her inheritance. I resisted the urge to respond with venom. Funny, I said, leaning down to snip another bloom. I don't recall you being in the will. People change their minds, she said with a smirk. Especially when they're sick and lonely. I always made time for him. A flicker of heat passed through me, but I forced it down. You were his secretary. And more, she said, stepping close enough that I could smell her perfume, something too sugary, meant to cover something rotten. Garrett and I were very close with him. He trusted us. I stood, holding the rose stem gently in my gloved hand. If you came here to rattle me, Jordan, I suggest you try harder. Her smile faltered for a second, just a flicker. Tomorrow will be enlightening. Don't be surprised if you find you're not the center of the story anymore. She turned on her heel and walked away, her heels tapping out one final warning as she disappeared down the path, red coat flashing like a war flag. I stayed there, heart beating harder than I liked, until the wind picked up again and rustled the roses. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. She was bluffing. She had to be. My father wasn't easily fooled, especially not by someone like her. But still, a small worm of doubt had burrowed into my chest. What if he had changed something? What if Garrett had manipulated him in those final days when I was kept at a distance? I turned back to the rose bushes, hands trembling just slightly. As I reached down to collect the fallen petals, I noticed something odd. The soil beneath one of the older bushes looked disturbed, the mulch too fresh, the earth not settled. Curiosity bloomed where suspicion had rooted. I brushed back the leaves and dug a little with my gloves, and there it was, something hidden in the shadowed soil. A small, sealed envelope, damp at the edges but intact. My breath caught as I read the name on the front, Celeste, written in my father's unmistakable scrawl. I sat back on my heels, staring at it like it might vanish. The envelope was thick, the paper a little rough, as though it had waited for just this moment to be found. My father never did anything without purpose. My fingers trembled as I held it, as if the weight of it alone had changed something fundamental in the air. Jordan's words echoed, but now they felt distant, irrelevant. I clutched the envelope tightly to my chest and rose to my feet, the garden suddenly alive with new possibility. My father had left me something, not just roses or memories, but a secret hidden in the soil of his legacy. And whatever it was, I was going to find out. I didn't open the envelope right away. My hands were still stained with soil when I rushed back inside, clutching it like it might evaporate if I let go. The moment I crossed the threshold of Willowshade's foyer, the weight of the house settled around me again, its stillness, its secrets. Everything felt poised, as if holding its breath. I set the envelope on the dining table and stared at it like it might blink. There was only one person I trusted with something like this. I didn't hesitate. I called Rowan. He picked up on the second ring. "Please tell me you're calling because you finally decided to elope with an architect." "Close," I said, breathless. "I found something. A letter. Hidden under Dad's roses." Silence stretched for a beat. "Then, I'm on my way. Don't touch anything. And chill the wine." He arrived 20 minutes later with a bottle of Pinot and that crooked half-smile that had always been equal parts comfort and trouble. We didn't hug, we never did. Our friendship didn't need it. He just brushed past me with the ease of someone who'd known the floor plan since childhood and headed straight to the kitchen. Moments later, he emerged with 2 glasses and a glint of curiosity in his eyes. "All right," he said, settling across from me at the table. "Let's see what the old man left behind." I slid the envelope toward him. "It's in his handwriting." Rowan inspected it, nodded once, then carefully broke the seal. Inside was a folded letter and something that clinked, a small brass key. He read silently, eyes moving quickly, his mouth tightening as he went. When he finished, he passed it to me wordlessly. My eyes scanned the paper. The ink was slightly smudged, but unmistakably his. "Celeste, if you're reading this, it means you've finally gone back to the garden. Good. You always understood the truth in the soil. This key belongs to me. And now it belongs to you. Trust is like chess, it only works if you see the whole board. And not every bishop wears white. Don't give it to anyone else. Especially not Garrett. Protect what matters. Love, always Dad." I looked up slowly. "Chess." Rowan tapped the letter. "He's warning you. About moves and masks." I held up the brass key. It was warm from my hand, small enough to fit a desk drawer or a box. There's only one place it could go. He didn't need to ask. We both knew my father's study was the sanctum of secrets. He never let anyone inside after Mom died. The door creaked open under my hand, dust stirring in shafts of light. The mahogany desk sat like a monument in the middle of the room, and I moved toward it on instinct. The top drawer, the one he always kept locked, had a small brass keyhole. My heart thudded as I slipped the key inside and turned it. It clicked open with a whisper. Inside was a velvet-lined compartment. I reached in and pulled out a thick folder bound with a red tie, a USB drive taped to the top, and a slim legal envelope labeled in my father's handwriting, for Celeste and Rowan. We spread everything out on the desk. Rowan opened the folder while I handled the envelope. Inside were surveillance photos, grainy but clear enough. Jordan speaking with a nurse in the hallway of St. Audley's. Garrett standing behind my father's wheelchair, his hand on the old man's shoulder, his smile too wide. Notes, timestamps, locations. Rowan popped the USB into his laptop. The screen flickered to life, and video clips filled the folder. He opened the first one. There she was, Jordan, her red lips curled into that too smooth smile, slipping a stack of cash to a woman in scrubs outside the hospital. The audio was poor, but you didn't need sound to understand betrayal. Clip after clip followed, Garrett removing documents from Brennan and Locke's archive room, Jordan rifling through drawers in my father's office when she thought no one was watching. I felt sick. My fingers curled into fists at my sides. They were playing him, I whispered. All that time, pretending to care. Rowan said nothing for a moment, then turned to me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "There's more. Your father wasn't working alone." He passed me another folder, this one marked with a name I hadn't heard aloud in years, Silas Brennan. My stomach dropped. Silas? My brother? He hasn't spoken to me since. "I know," Rowan said softly. But he didn't disappear. He's been helping your dad. Quietly. Feeding him intel from the inside. I shook my head, trying to process it all. So he pretended to side with Jordan and Garrett. Why? Because they trusted him. He made them think he hated your father. But really, he was building a case. I stared at the photos, the videos, the evidence laid out like puzzle pieces. My father, always a few steps ahead. Silas, my estranged brother, playing spy in a world we never knew existed. Jordan and Garrett, slick and smug, so sure they had us fooled. But they hadn't counted on this. On the letter. On the key. On the weight of a legacy too deeply rooted to steal. Then let's finish this game, I said, my voice steady now. Rowan raised his glass. Check's coming. I barely slept. The footage replayed in my mind, on a loop I couldn't silence. Jordan's careful smirk as she slid cash into the nurse's hand. Garrett, his fingers brushing confidential files with all the arrogance of a man who believed he was untouchable. And behind it all, the quiet, unshakable revelation that Silas had been involved. My brother, who hadn't returned my calls in 3 years. Who'd vanished after our last bitter argument, too angry to say goodbye at the hospital, too proud to show up at the funeral. But now I saw his name written in our father's hand, and Rowan's voice confirmed what I never could have guessed. Silas had been helping us all along. I sat in my father's study that morning, still in my robe, coffee cold beside me, and pulled the evidence folders closer. I needed to understand the full scope of it, the architecture of betrayal Garrett and Jordan had built, brick by brick, while pretending to care for a dying man. Rowan appeared in the doorway, tie crooked, coffee steaming in one hand. I assume you haven't moved. Only to boil with rage. He crossed the room, peering over my shoulder at the photos. I brought the files you asked for. The company logs, Garrett's employee contracts, Jordan's NDA. I nodded absently, scanning a printout from the USB. There were transaction records, meeting transcripts, and emails. So many emails. Jordan emailing herself files from Brennan and Locke under pseudonyms. Garrett sending unauthorized updates to Jordan's fake consulting firm, Veil Strategies, of all things. What audacity. She bribed a nurse, I murmured, pointing to the image. To learn if Dad had updated his will. She was trying to time it, get ahead of it. Rowan leaned on the desk beside me. That's criminal conspiracy. Fraud. Tampering with legal documents if we can prove she acted on the information. I looked up at him. And we can prove it? He nodded. With everything on the USB and what we pulled from the server archives, it's airtight. Your father knew how to lay a trail. And Silas helped him. Rowan sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. Silas reached out to your dad after learning Garrett was skimming company resources. He played along, acted like he wanted a piece of the pie. But why didn't he tell me? I whispered. Why let me believe he'd turned his back on us? Because you and your dad weren't always on the same page about him, Rowan said gently. Silas thought you'd tip his hand. He needed Garrett and Jordan to believe he hated both of you. The ache of that hit somewhere deep. I remembered the last time Silas and I spoke, an explosive argument in the hallway outside Dad's room, when Silas accused him of favoritism, of never forgiving his mistakes. I'd defended our father. Silas had walked out and never looked back. Until now. I opened another folder labeled Witness Documentation and found it, a statement from Silas, detailing how Jordan had approached him. How she'd whispered poison about legacy, about wealth, about how he deserved more. And how he played into it, pretending to be angry, to be hungry for revenge. There were screenshots of messages between Silas and Jordan, her promising him a cut of the inheritance if he helped her discredit Dad, if he agreed to back her claims that Walter Brennan had been mentally unfit during his final months. I felt my jaw clench as I read Jordan's words. We both know the old man was slipping. We just need your signature, Silas. You do this and we win big. Rowan pointed to the bottom of the page. Look at the check. A photo showed a bank draft made out to Silas Brennan for $10,000. The memo line, consulting, trust review. She paid him to lie. She tried, Rowan corrected. But he gave the check to your dad instead. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. He was never going to go through with it. No, he just let her think he would. That's how he got close enough to gather the evidence. That's how your father knew exactly what they were planning. I leaned back in the chair, the leather cool against my skin. The room was quiet, heavy with revelation. And Jordan? I asked. Why would she go this far? She had a job. She had Garrett. Rowan hesitated. You should see this. He passed me another file, thinner than the rest. Inside were clippings, old emails, and a final photograph, grainy but unmistakable. Jordan, years ago, standing beside my ex-husband at a gala. Not Garrett. My ex-husband. Derek. I stared at the photo, nausea tightening in my stomach. Jordan had been there, at the margins of my life, long before Garrett. She was the mistress, I whispered. She's the reason my marriage ended. I hadn't heard the front door creak open, but the sound of footsteps on the old parquet floor stirred me from sleep like a whisper under my skin. I blinked against the dim light, still curled on the couch in the study, files and folders strewn like a battlefield around me. The clock on the mantel read 2:11 a.m. I was just about to call out when I saw the shadow appear in the doorway. Tall, slouched from guilt or exhaustion, or both. Silas. My heart jumped into my throat, but I didn't move. Neither did he. For a moment, we just looked at each other, years of silence and broken threads stretching between us like spider silk. His face had changed since I last saw him, sharper, wearier. The boyish charm that used to disarm even the worst of our arguments had hardened into something else. I didn't know whether to cry or throw something at him. I didn't come for a fight, he said quietly, his voice hoarse. I came because you deserve to hear it from me. I sat up, wrapping the throw around my shoulders more tightly. Then talk. He stepped into the room, slow, as if the air itself resisted him. In his hand, he held a slim envelope and a flash drive. He set them both down on the coffee table, avoiding my eyes as he sank into the armchair across from me. I know you probably hate me, he said, finally meeting my gaze. And you have every right. I lied to you. Disappeared when things got hard. I didn't just let you think I was siding with them, I made you believe I was one of them. You didn't just let me believe it, I said, my voice brittle. You made it look real. I thought you hated Dad. I thought you hated me. I didn't hate you, he said quickly, leaning forward. I was angry. And yeah, I resented him. But I never stopped caring about you, Celeste. Not for a second. I looked down at the envelope he'd placed on the table. My name was written in his handwriting this time. I didn't open it. Not yet. I got a call from Garrett about a year ago, Silas said. Said he had a business proposal. I didn't know Jordan was involved until I met with them. The moment I saw her, I knew it was a setup. And I knew I couldn't let them get away with it. So you ran straight to Dad? I asked. No, not right away. I needed proof first. If I just walked into Willowshade and accused them of scheming, Dad would have tossed me out again. But once I had something real, audio clips, bank records, I showed him everything. And for the first time in years, he listened. He opened his coat and pulled out a recorder, sliding it toward me. What is it? I asked. Recordings of Jordan. I wore a wire. She talked openly when she thought I was angry enough to help her. Said Walter was senile. Said the estate needed younger energy. She even laughed about how easy it was to fool him. The thought made me nauseous. My father, frail and aware of his decline, still trying to protect us in his final days, being mocked behind his back. She paid you, I said flatly. Yes. 10 grand. I signed a false affidavit saying Dad was mentally unfit. It was a part of her legal maneuvering, trying to force a will amendment. I never filed it. Gave it all to Dad the same night. I stared at him, reading the wear in his shoulders, the regret behind his eyes. Why didn't you tell me any of this before? Because I didn't deserve to, he said, voice breaking. I left you to carry it all. The business, the estate, Dad's care. I let my bitterness poison everything. But he was right, Celeste. You were always the steady one. He looked at the recorder, then back at me. There's more. You should hear it for yourself. But what matters is, Jordan didn't just want money. She wanted to ruin you. My breath caught. Because of Derek? Silas nodded. She told me the whole story one night when she was drunk. You filed for divorce, and it cost her more than just a job. Her reputation, her cushy life, gone. She blamed you. Said you humiliated her. That she was going to take everything that ever belonged to you. Garrett, the estate, even the company. I swallowed, the familiar pain of that betrayal rekindling inside me. Jordan had been the other woman. The one who took my marriage and then, like it wasn't enough, had come back for my family too. She always played the long game, I murmured. So did Dad, Silas said. He saw it coming. All of it. That's why he started building the case. Why he brought me back in. And now, he said, sitting back, we have everything. The recordings, the forged documents, even her payment to me. You take this to the will reading, and it'll all come undone for them. The silence between us after that wasn't uncomfortable. It was heavy with grief, maybe forgiveness too. I reached for the envelope, but didn't open it. There would be time for that. I looked at my brother, troubled, flawed, but here. Trying. Dad knew what he was doing, I said. Silas nodded. He always did. And maybe, just maybe, he'd known we'd find our way back to each other too. By mid-morning, Willowshade Hall was no longer mine alone. Photographers loitered just beyond the gates, their lenses peeking through the iron slats like vultures waiting for carnage. I stood at the second-floor window, clutching a mug of tea that had gone cold in my hand, watching the sleek black car pull up to the front drive. Of course, they brought a camera crew. Jordan emerged first, dressed in a cream suit that screamed calculated innocence. Her hair was curled to perfection, her makeup camera-ready. She waved toward the camera like she'd just arrived at a film premiere, not the reading of a dead man's will. Garrett followed close behind, adjusting his tie with a tight smile, all teeth and nerves. He looked up toward the house, but I didn't move from the window. I wanted them to see me watching. Rowan stood in the hallway behind me, reading over his notes for what felt like the 100th time. Ready for the show? He asked without looking up. As I'll ever be, I murmured, setting the tea down. Let's remind them who they're dealing with. The sitting room had been arranged carefully. No legal firm, no sterile office. My father had insisted Willowshade host the reading, and I honored that. The fire was lit, the room warm with polished wood and the scent of old paper. Jordan took the center of the couch like a queen awaiting coronation. Garrett lingered near the bookshelves, scanning the spines like he might discover something useful among the fiction. Rowan cleared his throat. We'll begin with Walter Brennan's last will and testament, notarized on January 3rd. Present are the key inheritors, Celeste Brennan and Garrett Maddox. Jordan interrupted before he could continue. We also have my media team here, just to ensure transparency. For the sake of public interest. Rowan didn't even blink. They'll be silent or they'll be removed. She smiled thinly and folded her hands in her lap. The will itself was straightforward, almost painfully so. 60% of the estate, including Willowshade Hall and full creative control of Brennan and Locke, would go to me. The remaining 40% of the estate, including a shareholder position at the firm, was left to Garrett Maddox. Jordan beamed, smug satisfaction rising off her like perfume. Looks like Walter finally saw reason, she said to Garrett. Told you the long game would pay off. I didn't respond. I simply watched her with a quiet patience I knew unnerved her more than any outburst. But Rowan wasn't finished. He pulled a sealed envelope from his case and laid it carefully on the table. However, the will includes a final codicil. It was signed and witnessed 4 days before Walter's death. Mr. Brennan requested it remain sealed until the formal reading. Jordan's smile wavered just slightly. Garrett shifted where he stood. Rowan opened the envelope with care and read aloud, his voice crisp and deliberate. To my daughter Celeste and to Mr. Garrett Maddox, I have left behind not only my worldly possessions, but the weight of my name. The inheritance herein is conditional. If either party accepts their share of this estate, it shall trigger a full investigation into any evidence of fraud, coercion, or conflict of interest surrounding my affairs in the final 6 months of my life. Jordan's head snapped toward him. Excuse me? Rowan continued. As of the signing of this codicil, my attorney and my children are in possession of documentation, visual, financial, and testimonial, that will be handed over to authorities should these conditions be breached. I refuse to let my legacy become a trophy for thieves. Garrett's voice cracked. He can't do that. That's coercive. It invalidates the will. Rowan looked up. No, Mr. Maddox. It makes it enforceable. Jordan's face paled, then flushed red. This is outrageous. You can't possibly have evidence. Walter was confused. He was dying. I stood then slowly. He was dying, yes. But he wasn't confused. He was calculating. Watchful. And unlike you, he didn't underestimate the people who actually loved him. She turned to Garrett, whispering something sharp. He stepped forward, voice taut. We demand to see this so-called evidence. Rowan's lips curved just slightly. You'll see everything. But be aware, once you request the evidence, the investigation officially begins. I felt the tension shift in the room, like a storm cloud darkening behind Jordan's carefully arranged facade. She glanced toward the cameras. Still rolling. There would be no walking this back. Garrett, who had once been poised and polished, now looked like a man unraveling. We need to speak privately. No, I said. Everything stays out in the open now. That's what you wanted, right? Transparency? Rowan collected the documents, tapping them into a neat stack. You have until tomorrow morning to make your decision. Accept the inheritance and the evidence is handed over. Decline, and you walk away with nothing but your reputations, however dented they already are. Jordan stood, face tight. This isn't over. No, I said, my voice calm and resolute. But it's the beginning of the end for both of you. They left without another word, the camera crew trailing behind like rats after a sinking ship. As the door closed behind them, I finally exhaled. Rowan looked over at me. That went well. They expected a garden, I said softly, but they forgot about the thorns. And this time, they pricked back. The air in the study felt like it carried weight, like every breath I took might stir the balance of justice already shifting into place. The morning sun poured through the windows, casting sharp angles across the gleaming hardwood floor as Rowan arranged the files with methodical precision. I watched from my seat near the hearth, silently cradling a cup of coffee I hadn't sipped. The fire crackled behind me, but it didn't warm me. Only clarity did now. Jordan and Garrett arrived precisely at 10, punctual as always when they thought they held control. Jordan was no longer radiant in ivory. She wore dark navy now, her mouth set in a stiff line that couldn't quite hide the tremor at the corner. Garrett walked like a man heading to court rather than a conversation, jittery, defensive. No camera crew this time. No smug commentary. Rowan met them with the kind of practiced professionalism that always cloaked his sharpest moves. You've asked to see the evidence. That constitutes an acceptance of the conditions outlined in Walter Brennan's codicil. As such, all relevant materials will be disclosed in this room. Be advised, copies have already been submitted to authorities. Garrett shifted in his chair. Jordan folded her arms tightly, jaw clenched. Show us then. Rowan didn't blink. Gladly. He opened the first file and set a series of photographs on the table. Here we have Ms. Vale, also known as Margaret Voss, engaging in multiple private conversations with a nurse from St. Audley's. The audio from these meetings confirms she offered monetary compensation in exchange for information about Walter Brennan's medical status and cognitive condition. Jordan flinched at the mention of her real name, but she said nothing. Rowan continued, sliding over a printed transcript. The bribe was documented and witnessed. The nurse later came forward, concerned about Jordan's motives. She believed Jordan was attempting to lay groundwork for a legal claim that Walter was mentally unfit to manage his affairs. He opened the next file. Surveillance photos of Garrett, time-stamped and labeled. And here we have Mr. Maddox removing protected documents from the Brennan and Locke archive. These include financial forecasts, proprietary designs, and company valuation reports, all of which were emailed to a shell company, Veil Strategies, operated by Ms. Voss. Garrett's face turned crimson. That's circumstantial. I had access. I was a partner. Not to those files, Rowan said flatly. And certainly not to forward them to a non-existent firm your girlfriend created 2 weeks prior. He tapped a folder labeled Internal Communications. Your own emails detail intentions to create leverage against Celeste should the will not be in your favor. Garrett turned to me, his voice rough. You don't understand. Your father didn't trust you to run the company. I was trying to protect it. He told me. You exploited his illness, I cut in, my tone icy. And you thought I'd be too broken to fight back. Rowan reached into his briefcase and retrieved a slim silver laptop. There's more. This is from the USB Celeste found beneath the roses. It contains video footage, audio logs, and a final message from Walter Brennan himself. He clicked play. The screen lit up with a familiar view, my father seated in his study, the same one where we all sat now. His face looked thinner than I remembered, but his voice was clear. Intentional. If you're watching this, he began, it means the game has reached its final move. Jordan shifted in her seat, tension radiating off her in waves. Walter continued. Greed is louder than grief. I've watched it swell in the walls of this house. But I have also seen loyalty, quiet, strong, and enduring. Celeste, if you've found this, you've already proven that you understand what legacy truly means. And to those of you who sit in this room, salivating over what you think you've earned, know that the thorns I planted were not meant to keep you out, but to test if you belonged inside at all. I felt my throat tighten. The room was silent, but for his voice. My estate is protected. My family, what remains of it, is more than capable of reclaiming what matters. And if you believe you can outmaneuver what I've built, checkmate. The screen faded to black. Jordan stood abruptly, fury replacing her carefully constructed poise. You can't prove intent. These videos are manipulated. Walter hated me. He was trying to ruin me. Rowan calmly retrieved the last piece of documentation. This is a notarized statement from Silas Brennan, corroborating your attempts to bribe him into signing a false affidavit declaring Walter mentally unfit. He kept the check you wrote him. It's in our possession. I was framed, she snapped. It's a smear campaign. The door behind us opened then, and Silas entered. His presence was deliberate, controlled. I wasn't framed, he said. You handed me every piece of evidence yourself. You wanted me to burn down my family. You picked the wrong brother. The color drained from Jordan's face. Just then, 2 officers stepped into the room. Rowan turned to them and gave a nod. They've seen the evidence. We're proceeding. One officer approached Jordan while the other moved to Garrett. You're under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, financial theft, and obstruction of justice, the lead officer announced. Please stand. Jordan lashed out. You think this ends me? You think I don't have more than this? Maybe you do, I said, rising from my seat. But not here. And not with my father's name in your mouth ever again. She was cuffed, seething, her eyes wild. Garrett didn't speak. He simply bowed his head as the metal clicked around his wrists. And just like that, the game was over. I looked to Rowan, then to Silas, then back to the empty screen where my father's last words still lingered in the silence. Checkmate, indeed. The courtroom was colder than I expected, sterile in its neutrality, all pale walls and sharp wood. A place where truth was meant to be weighed like gold on a scale. I sat at the front with Rowan beside me, a small stack of evidence files resting in my lap like armor. To my right, Silas leaned forward with his elbows on his knees, eyes fixed straight ahead. We hadn't said much that morning, but I felt the strength of his presence beside me, steadying me in a way I hadn't realized I needed. Jordan entered last. No designer heals this time, no camera crew trailing her in a halo of false importance. Just plain flats and a drab suit that tried to disguise her, but it couldn't. Not after everything. She gave me one quick look before being led to the defendant's table, where Garrett already sat, hands clasped tightly in front of him like a man clinging to the last rung of civility. He didn't meet my eyes. The judge entered. The clerk announced the case. Everything moved quickly, faster than I'd prepared for. But when they called me to the stand, the courtroom seemed to stretch open, every face turning toward me as I rose and walked the aisle with 1,000 invisible weights pressing on my shoulders. I sat down, placed my hand on the Bible, and swore to tell the truth. The truth, I thought bitterly, was the only thing I had left when all the lies were stripped away. The prosecutor approached. "Ms. Brennan, could you describe your relationship with the defendants?" Garrett Maddox was my former partner, both romantically and in business, I answered evenly. Jordan Vale, also known as Margaret Voss, was once his secretary. Later, she became his girlfriend and, more recently, a companion to my father in the months leading up to his death. The prosecutor nodded. "Were you aware of any improper activities during that time?" "Not at first. But after my father passed, I discovered a letter he had hidden for me, along with a key. That key unlocked a drawer in his study containing documents, photos, and a USB drive. The evidence showed a scheme orchestrated by Ms. Vale and Mr. Maddox to manipulate my father, steal confidential company information, and ultimately secure a large portion of his estate through coercion and fraud." I watched as the jurors leaned in, eyes narrowed, minds already turning the wheels. Jordan sat stiffly, lips pressed in a hard line. Garrett stared at the table. The prosecutor showed them one of the surveillance photos, Jordan and the nurse outside the hospital. "Do you recognize this image?" "Yes. That's Jordan paying a nurse from St. Audley's." The video and audio confirmed she was attempting to access my father's medical records and monitor whether he had updated his will. More photos followed. Garrett slipping into the archive room. Jordan rifling through drawers in my father's office. A still of the fake consulting firm's logo on her laptop screen. Each image was like a nail driven straight into the floor beneath them, pinning them down with truth. When my testimony turned toward my father, I felt the tightness in my throat return. He wasn't just suspicious, he was preparing. He knew something was wrong. He'd seen enough in his life to recognize manipulation, and, even in his final months, he chose to act. He wasn't just protecting me. He was protecting everything he built. "And how did that impact you personally?" I hesitated, just a breath. It was betrayal. Deep, calculated betrayal from someone I once trusted. And another who had already broken something in me once before, when she destroyed my marriage. But this time, I chose not to let it define me. I chose to fight. The prosecutor nodded, his job nearly done. No further questions. I stepped down, heartbeat loud in my ears. As I passed Jordan's table, she looked up and hissed, her voice sharp enough to carry. "You think you've won? You're not better than me, Celeste. You just wear nicer masks." The courtroom went still. The judge pounded the gavel. "Ms. Vale," he snapped, "one more outburst and you'll be removed." Jordan smiled, sickly, venomous, but she said nothing more. Garrett remained mute. When his turn came to testify, he simply declined. No confession. No denial. Just a quiet, exhausted man finally buried beneath the consequences of his choices. By the end of the day, the courtroom had shifted. Sympathy that might have once leaned toward Jordan's poised exterior dissolved beneath the weight of fact. She had orchestrated every detail, manipulated every move. And now, she was exposed. Outside the courthouse, I stood in the late afternoon light as reporters gathered beyond the rope lines, but I didn't speak. I had said all that needed saying where it mattered most. Silas came to stand beside me, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. The breeze lifted my hair, and I closed my eyes. "You did it," he said quietly. "No," I replied. "We did." Because even after everything, I knew the truth didn't bloom on its own. It needed roots, protection, patience, and sometimes a little fire to help it grow. There's a moment in every storm when the wind goes still, just long enough for you to believe it might be over. But silence can be deceptive. I'd felt it before in the courtroom, just after Jordan's outburst, when her voice echoed and then died out, leaving behind a hush thick with judgment. And now, here we were again, in the detective's office, waiting for the final thread to snap free. The woman I'd once known as Jordan Vale, pristine, calculating, insufferably smug, sat at the opposite end of the table, wrists bound in silver cuffs, her posture still trying to play composed even as her image unraveled by the second. The nameplate on the table said Detective Marla Chin, and the woman behind it had the kind of eyes that had seen too much to be charmed. "I think it's time you know who you are really dealing with," Chin said, sliding a folder across the table toward me and Rowan. Her tone was matter-of-fact, but there was something beneath it, satisfaction, maybe. The righteous kind. Rowan opened the folder, scanning the top page. Then he looked at me. "She's not Jordan Vale," he said. "Her real name is Margaret Voss." I blinked, heart hammering once against my ribs. "That name sounds familiar." "It should," Chin said. "She has priors in 5 states. Charges dropped or reduced every time. She's been operating under different aliases for over a decade, always starting as a secretary, always latching onto men in power, especially those close to death or scandal. Her pattern is precise. Seduce. Infiltrate. Rewrite the will. Vanish." I stared at the photos inside the folder. Grainy shots from previous mugshots. Margaret with shorter hair, blonde in one, brunette in another. The same eyes. The same chilling smile. The kind that belonged on someone who played puppeteer for a living. Rowan leaned forward. "How the hell did she stay hidden for this long?" "She was smart," Chin replied. "Never used the same name twice in the same city. Kept her trail cold by jumping state lines and targeting families with just enough dysfunction to give her cover. She counted on silence and shame doing the rest." I let out a slow breath, trying to absorb the magnitude of what we were hearing. "So, we were just her next project?" Chin nodded. Walter Brennan was one of her more ambitious targets. She thought she could get the house, the firm, and your father's legacy in one clean sweep. But he turned the game on her. "She didn't see him coming," I said quietly. "He saw through her. And he laid a trap," Rowan added. Carefully, methodically. "Like always." Chin pulled out a flash drive and inserted it into the screen behind her. The video began, grainy surveillance footage from Willowshade's eastern hallway, the one near my father's office. I hadn't seen this clip before. The angle caught a conversation, my father, standing with the help of a cane, and Jordan, Margaret, leaning against the doorframe, playing innocent. "I just want what's fair, Walter," she said in that syrupy tone I remembered too well. "You're not thinking clearly anymore. Don't let your daughter manipulate you." "I'm old," he said, his voice tired but sharp. "Not blind." Her smile twitched. "You're misjudging me." "I see you, Margaret Voss," he said then. "I know who you are." The silence that followed in the video was suffocating. I watched as her expression faltered, the smile slipping into something colder. The act dropped. "You can't prove anything." "I don't have to," he said calmly. "Because I've already told Celeste everything." He was bluffing, I knew that now, but it worked. She froze, just long enough for the camera to catch the shift in her eyes. A mask cracking. The clip ended. The room fell still. Chin turned to me. He baited her. Gave her just enough rope to hang herself with. Then recorded the moment she lost control. It was the final piece we needed to reopen her old cases. She's going away for a long time. I stared at the still frame frozen on the monitor, her face just before the reveal, mid-transformation from charm to venom. How many families did she do this to? Too many to count, Chin said. But none of them saw her coming the way your father did. And none had someone like you to finish what he started. I nodded slowly, feeling the weight of it settle over me. For years I'd blamed myself for not seeing it, for letting Jordan into our lives, for not protecting my father better in the end. But now I saw the truth. He had been protecting me. All the while. "She wanted to erase me," I said. "First with Derek. Then Garrett. She thought taking my father would finish the job. But she underestimated legacy," Rowan said. "And blood that remembers where it comes from." As we stepped outside into the afternoon light, I took one last look at the folder in my hand. Not Jordan. Margaret. A liar. A thief. A con artist. No more masks. No more games. She was done pretending, and I was done paying for her deception. The verdict came swift and sharp. Margaret Voss, formerly Jordan Vale, was sentenced to life without parole. Her history caught up with her in a flurry of reopened cases, victims from multiple states stepping forward with stories that mirrored my own. Her time of slipping through cracks was over. Garrett Maddox wasn't spared either. The court handed down a 15-year sentence for his role in the fraud and corporate theft. No theatrics from him, just a resigned silence that told me he knew he'd traded everything for a hollow promise. I thought I'd feel triumphant watching them fall. But the truth was quieter, more reflective. It felt like exhaling after years of holding my breath. That morning, a few days after the sentencing, I returned to Willowshade alone. Rowan and Silas had offered to meet me there, but I needed a moment, just me and the house. The air was different now. Lighter, less weighted with things unsaid. The roses in the garden had started to bloom again, untamed and bright under the spring sun. I walked past them, remembering that first morning with pruning shears in hand and dirt under my fingernails, unaware of the war blooming beneath my feet. The front door creaked open with its familiar groan. I stepped inside, inhaling the scent of old wood and faint lilac, my father's favorite. As I passed the study, I paused, glancing at the drawer where it all began. The lock, the key, the letter. So much had unraveled since then, and yet I felt more put together now than I ever had. When I reached the sitting room, a small parcel rested neatly on the table, wrapped in plain brown paper with my name in my father's careful handwriting. My chest tightened as I picked it up. A letter was tucked beneath the string, addressed simply, "For Celeste, when the dust has finally settled." I sank into the chair by the fireplace and unfolded the letter slowly. "My dearest Celeste, if you're reading this, then the fight is over, and knowing you, you didn't just endure it. You won. I always knew you had the strength, even when you doubted it. Especially then. There's one last gift I wanted you to have. You'll find the deed enclosed. It's yours, completely. A new beginning, if you want it. Or a return to your roots, if that's what your heart needs. It's the lot next to your old flower shop. I bought it years ago, quietly. I always thought you'd return to it one day when the world had stopped demanding you carry it on your shoulders. Grow something, Celeste. Let beauty bloom again. Love always. Dad." My hands trembled as I reached into the parcel and pulled out the deed. He hadn't just left me a house or a company, he'd left me a way forward. A space to breathe. To create. To become. I stared out the window for a long moment, tears blurring the garden into a watercolor of green and white. Later that afternoon, Rowan and Silas arrived with takeout and 2 bottles of wine. We sat on the floor of the kitchen, like kids sneaking into an empty house, legs crossed, laughter spilling between bites of curry and sips of red. "You gonna reopen Wild Ferns?" Silas asked between mouthfuls. I looked up. Not quite. Something new. Something that carries his name, but mine too. Rowan raised a brow. "Got a name in mind?" "Brennan Botanicals," I said. "A blend of legacy and future. Flowers, herbs, sustainable goods. But more than that, a place for healing." Silas grinned. "Dad would have liked that. He'd probably insist on installing a chessboard in the lobby," Rowan added. We laughed, the kind of laughter that comes only after the tears have dried. The kind that says we survived something. Together. Over the next few weeks, we worked like a team possessed. Rowan helped with the legal paperwork and branding. Silas, surprisingly handy, took over renovations. I designed the space with care and memory, every flower selected with intention. Lavender for peace. Rosemary for remembrance. White roses, of course, for legacy. The community responded quickly. The Brennan name carried weight, less for scandal now, and more for the story of endurance and redemption it represented. Customers trickled in first, then came steadily, drawn by the charm of the storefront and the authenticity we offered. People weren't just buying arrangements, they were stepping into something meaningful. The day the sign was mounted, I stood beneath it with Rowan and Silas at my side. Brennan Botanicals gleamed against the soft gray of the storefront, painted with hand-drawn vines curling beneath each letter. I ran my fingers along the wood, thinking of my father. of his faith in me, of the soil he'd turned with his own hands so I could find mine again. "You okay?" Rowan asked gently. "I'm finally home," I said. And I meant it. Because Willowshade was where the pain bloomed. But Brennan Botanicals, that was where I chose to plant something new. The greenhouse doors groaned as they opened, flooding the warm air with the scent of soil and blooms. I stepped inside slowly, letting the quiet hush of the space wrap around me. Sunlight filtered in through the glass panels above, casting dappled shadows on the stone floor. Rows of white roses stretched in neat formation, their petals just beginning to open. In their presence, I felt my breath deepen, my shoulders loosen, the last threads of tension slipping from my body. I hadn't been in here alone since we reopened. Brennan Botanicals had grown quickly, faster than I expected. Clients came not just for arrangements, but for meaning, for healing, for something they couldn't name until they saw it blooming quietly in a glass vase or peeking from a burlap-wrapped bouquet. And every stem, every blend of color and fragrance, felt like a reclamation. Today, though, I needed silence. Needed to remember how this began, not just with thorns and secrets, but with a single letter. A choice to dig deeper, to listen. At the center of the greenhouse, tucked beneath a sprawling vine of jasmine, was a small marble plaque. I knelt in front of it now, my hand brushing away the speckled dust that had settled across its surface. The engraving was simple, but the words etched into it made my throat tighten every time I read them. To Celeste, who proved the strongest roots break through stone. My father's final message. The one I'd discovered just a week after we'd opened, hidden behind a wooden panel in the greenhouse's foundation. Silas found it while rewiring the irrigation system. He'd called me over without a word, and we'd stood there together in silence, reading the plaque as if it were scripture. "Strongest roots," I whispered aloud now, tracing the words with my fingers. "That's what you saw in me, even when I didn't." I stood slowly and moved through the greenhouse, touching petals as I passed, lavender for calm, calendula for comfort, snapdragons for resilience. I remembered planting these with Rowan and Silas just months ago, our hands raw and aching from long days and stubborn roots. But we kept going. That was the thing about healing. It never bloomed all at once. It grew in seasons. The door creaked open behind me. Rowan stepped in, a clipboard tucked under one arm, his tie slightly crooked in a way I'd grown to love. "There you are," he said, eyes scanning the rows until he found me. "You're supposed to be on break." "I'm terrible at breaks." "You're worse at delegating." I smiled. Guilty. He came to stand beside me, his gaze softening when he spotted the plaque. He nodded toward it. "Think he knew how much those words would matter?" "I think he always knew the timing of everything," I said. When to cut. When to let grow. He didn't just leave instructions, he left faith. Rowan was quiet for a moment. Then he reached into his folder and handed me an envelope. "This just came in. Final confirmation from the city. Brennan Botanicals is officially recognized as a historic community revitalization site. Tax breaks, funding, the works." I blinked. That was fast. He grinned. "People like what you've done here. It's not just a flower shop. It's a story people want to be part of." I held the envelope in both hands, letting the moment sink in. It wasn't about the recognition, it was about the continuation. The proof that even the most painful past could be shaped into something new. Outside the greenhouse, I heard Silas calling to one of the delivery drivers, his voice light and easy, a far cry from the angry silence that used to define him. He'd grown too, perhaps more than any of us. Working with his hands again, restoring wood beams and replanting soil, had softened the grief in him. Now he laughed more. Lingered longer. Sometimes I caught him standing in the shop's front window after we closed, just watching the petals sway in the light. "I still can't believe she's gone," I said softly, thinking of Margaret Voss, how someone so destructive could vanish so quickly once truth arrived. And Garrett, locked behind the very plans he thought would free him. Rowan nodded. "Justice doesn't always look like punishment. Sometimes it looks like peace. And sometimes it looks like a bouquet," I murmured, glancing at the arrangement I'd made earlier that morning. White roses, Dusty Miller, sweet pea. A tribute. Not to their downfall, but to our survival. We stood in silence until the wind brushed through the greenhouse vents, stirring the leaves in a gentle rustle. I turned to him, smiling now. Let's plant something new today. He raised an eyebrow. Again? We've got half the county blooming already. Doesn't mean we're done. We stepped outside into the light, the breeze warm against my cheeks. Customers moved through the courtyard, laughing, pointing at flower beds. A child tugged at her mother's sleeve, asking about the purple blooms by the bench. This was what I'd fought for. Not just land or inheritance, but the right to rebuild in my name. On my terms. The past would always live in the soil. But the future, mine, was blooming.